Welcome, everyone. Happy Trans Day of Visibility. This is a discussion panel between trans and non-binary youth across the country on what Trans Day visibility means to them and how we ensure our own visibility and our voices are heard. So we'll be discussing the film Heightened Scrutiny. To start off, hi guys, my name is Jay, he, him. I'm coming in here from California, and I am a 16-year-old trans activist.
I'll go
And
next.
Bekah, you wanna go?
Hi, my name is Bekah. I'm also a 16-year-old trans activist from California, and I'm a part of the It Gets Better Youth Voices program.
Thank you so much, Bekah. I'll go next. My name is Marshall. I'm based in Texas. I'm a trans and student policy equity advocate, and I'm also part of the It Gets Better class of 2026. Mila?
Hi, I'm Mila. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a trans girl. I'm a freshman. I'm 14, and I'm excited.
All right, cool. Well, let's jump right into it. First, to give you guys a bit of background about the film we'll be discussing today, Heightened Scrutiny is a documentary film that follows Trace Strandhio, who's an ACLU attorney and the first out trans person to argue before the Supreme Court, as he fights a high-stakes legal battle to overturn Tennessee's ban on gender-affirming care for trans youth. That was called United States versus Scrimeti. And Heightened Scrutiny can be streamed for free this week only through April 5th on Kinema. You can check out the link in the chat. Now, we aren't even 3 years into 2026, and there are already 493 anti-LGBTQ bills being tracked in the US this year. That number keeps climbing. As a matter of fact, since we first drafted this message on Friday, March 13th, the ACLU has started tracking 4 new bills. Trans and non-binary youth are being targeted by politicians, schools, and systems that should be protecting them. Trans youth deserve safety, they deserve joy, they deserve a future, and they deserve better. For Trans Day visibility, wherever you are, you need to show up. Go hard for trans youth and make sure they know that you have their back. Let's show trans youth that they deserve better and that we're committed to fighting alongside them for it. And now, let's watch the clip.
We are here now to say you're not going to do this without us watching. You're not going to do this to our kids in our city, in our schools. They think that they have all the power, that they can bully our young people, and that they can do so without any accountability. And so we're going to show them that that's not the case. Do you want to sit here and then here? I'll sit behind you. And we'll save this for your mom.
We'll cut you off after a certain period of times. Craig, can you call the first? And if you can come up here. Yeah, so Mila and
My name is Mila. I am 12 years old. I'm 7th grade. I speak 4 languages, and I'm my school student representative. And of course, I'm a transgender. I don't understand why adults, especially adults who are transgender, tell me and the entire trans community what to do, who they are, what their gender identity means. Woo!
We hear time and time again that this is just about asking questions, but that is not how civil rights laws work. And we know that you don't have the power to change what is mandated by federal, state, and city law. So at the end of the day, you're doing this to make a statement about how you feel about trans students. And so we're here to make a counter statement. We love you, we care about you, and we will keep fighting.
I'm Liz Walker, a local babysitter, a trans person, a former activist, athlete. Excuse me, can you please put down your phone while I'm talking?
what that the case we're at the Supreme Court is about?
Yeah, no.
All the kids who are just like you, but they live in Tennessee, it's like one day to another, all of a sudden the healthcare's gone.
This is about humanity, but sadly, many people lack of humanity.
I'm always like so struck by is this way that the conversations about trans kids creates all of this sense of like who trans kids are, and they're being manipulated by TikTok and their parents, and then you meet someone like you, and it's like,
It wasn't really anything. Because we didn't know what transgender was or anything. Like, I'm like, oh, I'd like girl. I like be girl. I be girl. And then I'm like, Mom, can we get girls' clothes for me? And then we did.
it's not like you guys were going and getting hormones that day.
No.
But exactly. See, that's ridiculous. But that's the story that the public is told, and that the courts are gonna think is true.
Can make decisions about our children, about everything in terms of health. And I don't know, like, let's assume she needs a surgery in her brain, and I have to sign a paper that it's a good thing to do.
Yeah.
And suddenly I can't.
The government is saying, no.
No.
We get to decide. We get to decide. This is what we filed at the Supreme Court.
Oh, God. How many pages?
Goodness me.
53. The case is about the families. It's about the fact at the end of the day, this is about families doing what families do,
and
caring for
supporting
each
each other.
other, and the government is saying, in this one way, you can't. So they were in Tennessee. The government said, no more health care, no puberty blockers.
Or Tennessee?
The government of Tennessee. Now she's 16. And she now goes, so then she was trying to get health care in North Carolina, and then they banned health care in North Carolina. Then she was trying to get health care in Ohio, and they banned health care in Ohio. So now people are flying to other places every time they need to have a doctor's appointment.
Which is crazy.
Wow, that's expensive.
They say kids can't understand the consequences of this medical care. But do you understand the consequences of not getting this medical care?
Yeah.
What would it mean for you?
Like depression, anxiety, no self-esteem.
Would you be able to do all your high school things?
No, I don't think I would leave my room or my bed for
Sometimes when I hear transphobic people, I decide if I want to engage or not. And most of the times, I decide not to engage. Because there is no way to have a real, rational discussion. I do have very rational, logic argument to defend my daughter. But I think these other people, it's just like fear, and
To go with what?
it's ridiculous. It's very hard to.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's very hard to
Rationalize.
rationalize.
Yeah. All that to say, the hypocrisy is deep.
Hello and good morning to everyone. I have a normal life. I have a loving family. I hang out with my friends. I have sleepovers. I have after-school activities. I speak 4 languages, and I even got elected as my school's student representative twice. Now suddenly, out of nowhere, I'm hearing states are banning gender-affirming healthcare. I can't even tell you how my life would be without it. I mean, when I think of possibilities like that, I just get this overwhelming amount of sadness, fear, and anger. I'm just heartbroken for the people that have to experience that. It's wild that people think that trans kids are just a danger to society. I'm proud of being a trans girl. They might want to take away our rights, but they will never take away our existence and our pride.
right, welcome back, everyone. Hopefully, you enjoyed the clip. Yeah, we're just going to jump right into our discussion. We've all been watching the film, and we have a bunch of different ideas about the film and just about our experiences in general. So, to kick off the discussion, one question I had was just a recurring theme throughout the film is the use of news articles, especially news articles to justify anti-trans legislation. So, as trans youth, how are you affected by the news coverage of trans people in the media, and how does it change the way you see the world?
Is it all right
Well,
if I kick this off? Oh, I'm so
yeah.
sorry.
No, go
Yeah,
ahead.
absolutely. Being someone that lives in a regressive state with so much anti-trans policies, typically the reflection of transgender people within media and obviously within newspapers is really inflammatory, sometimes bigoted, and with that, it really affects my sense of self just through seeing me and the only way that I'm represented in the world or just like in general through media around me is in a negative aspect. So I think for a lot of trans people that's detrimental. And being in a unique environment where anti-trans legislation is so constant and almost so consistent living in Texas, it's something that I've kind of gotten used to. But earlier, I remember being 11 and now I'm 17, just really feeling hurt by a lot of headlines, just saying derogatory or really negative things about trans people, and of course facing oppression through legislation.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, it affects how people see us. It's how they view us. And really, what I've come to learn is that you can tell more about a person, about how they see you than how, than about, because how they see you depends, if they're judgmental, they're gonna, find, small things, then they're gonna blow them up. But if they're honest and kind, they're gonna be a little bit more, take a longer time and look at a bigger picture. So it really just shows, how judgmental these people are.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I think
oh, go ahead.
Oh, I think going on that, there's a lot of people, especially like within high school, I've seen a lot of like my peers kind of fall victim to what those articles are trying to push, the idea that like trans people are scary, trans people are different, trans people are like we don't want them here. And I think it's very like it works really well on young minds who are a little bit more malleable. So I've seen kids who aren't really informed on the issues who will take a more transphobic stance simply because that's what they've heard from the government, from the laws, from the news. And it's very exhausting because then it's like you have to kind of oftentimes like either your school or you as an individual might have to take on the role as an educator. And I've been put in that position multiple times where I've like seen people say like rude comments, not directly to me usually, but within the general space. And I'm like, okay, let's hold up, let's correct that. And oftentimes like they're a little stubborn, they don't want to, but it's something you kind of have to do because people are just getting that impression that like this is the way things should be and they're just going to believe it, and it's so hard to correct that if it stays in too long. So you really have to like then become someone who's fighting all the time.
Yeah, I mean, you know
Yeah.
what they say, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't force it to drink.
Exactly.
Yeah. And kind of building off of that, actually, with all the negative media out there, I mean, as a trans kid, I found it super useful to just cling to the sources of positive news that I've found in the media. Like, for example, Elliot Page, when he came out, that was amazing for me because he was definitely like, he's a trans man role model. I don't have a lot of those. And seeing those role models in media was something that was super helpful for me to be like, oh, well, okay, it's not entirely negative. There are a few moments of happiness. So, you guys, what was your top favorite piece of trans representation or queer representation in the media? I know, a big question, but give you guys some time to think about it. This is a hard question.
Oh, I got one. I just wrote about this for something else. My mom was really into, I think it's called Good Girls, and it's show about like fight crime, super cool, like, or not fight crime, do crime actually, and they go and like rob grocery stores to like help like with their children and their bills, and they have all these like really good like Robin Hood kind of stories, and it's this whole thing. So one of the characters is a single mom who had their kid really young, and the kid was often like very masculine presenting at like this first season or two, and then eventually they came out as trans, and it was a really big moment for me to like see that. And I thought it was really well handled in that show. Of it was not, the character's name is, oh my god, Ben Marks, and it was not like Ben's entire storyline that they were trans. There's all this stuff about him having to like help his mom and take on this like certain role even though he was a kid, and there was all these other things going on with him, like bullying, and he switched schools and all these different things. It was a strong piece of media, also because it was specifically tailored around the actor who actually like auditioned and came out as trans around the same time, I believe. I'm not 100% certain on the story, but they kind of like adapted the character to be trans to represent like them and their own identity instead of be a girl like it was initially supposed to be. So I thought that was really cool because it was like, let's promote a trans actor, let's make a more like a story that's not just tokenizing the trans character, and let's work with them to make sure this experience matches a sense of their own, like that can be relatable. And I thought it hit really well, and to see that kind of character to have that experience. It's a lot of other trans media, especially since there's so few examples of trans masked characters in the media. It's often hard to find ones that aren't tokenized or just aren't offensive. And so I thought that was one of the best handled instances in media I had seen, and especially seeing that at a younger age was really impactful.
You know, I mean, I don't really like remember like, you know, the first trans person I saw in media, but someone that does come to mind immediately is Sasha Colby. You know, she is a legendary, you know, drag queen, and just such someone that I look up to. You know, she's so unapologetically herself, and it's really inspiring to see someone just be being their true self in front of so many people.
Marshall, you got anything? No worries, you can pass if not.
Yeah,
it's a hard
absolutely.
question.
I thought you were gonna answer. But yeah, I think that what Bekah mentioned, Good Girls was actually a series that was really popular on Netflix for some time. And I remember watching it with my mom a few years ago, and that's something that I really enjoyed doing with my parent. Just sitting down and watching media. And I can definitely say as a trans kid, it was really nice and affirming to see yourself represented in media, even in the most unexpected places, like a show about, middle-aged moms
Crime.
like committing crime, right? And I found it really comforting that, hey, like, to me it kind of showed the normalization and the integration of like trans people, that like, it can be anyone's child. And I think the dynamic that Ben had with his mom, he was like the more mature one, and she was kind of like all over the place, being a single mother and like having an affair, which is more related to the plot. But it was just really nice to see like a trans kid having authentic representation. And what Bekah mentioned, what he mentioned, just that the show was tailored to kind of go with the actor's identity. I found that really heartwarming. But one personal trans character that I do like in media is one by the name of Rio. And he's from this book series, which is kind of niche. I'm really into manga by the name of Boys Run the Riot. And essentially, it's about this transgender teenager who gets into fashion, and he's just really struggling, of course, the manga is set in Japan, it's Japanese. But I think me being someone who is transgender, obviously, just seeing the binary experiences of, not wanting to wear dresses or having to assimilate or dress some sort of way to really just get through in society. And of course, the canon event that isn't the same for all trans people, because we aren't monoliths, but having a crush on a cis girl is something that I definitely experienced. So just seeing all these impactful moments that some trans people can relate to is something that I found really comforting. So I would personally say Rio from Boys Run the Riot.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that manga. I'm so glad you mentioned that. And actually, oh yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, I'm just saying, I think I read that at some point.
I feel like the odd one out here. I've not heard of this, but I'm not within the manga scene, so maybe I gotta check it out.
Bekah, you should. You really
Yes,
should.
it is good. It's a really good story.
I'll look it up after this.
All right. Well, kind of speaking on the topic of visibility, it's super important to have representation with fictional characters in the media, but it's also really important, I feel like, to actually know other people who are trans, or to hear of real life people who are trans in real life. So something else that I found super interesting as a trans kid who does trans activism is meeting other trans activists, or even just seeing other visible trans people in the media is so important. But as trans activists, we uniquely have the opportunity to be visible ourselves and to be kind of that beacon of hope for other people. So what do you guys think is the importance of being visible, especially as a trans youth specifically, in America, in order to further your activism and kind of spread hope?
I think, we do it to let people know we're out there, to let people know we exist, We have, and it's not just, we have so many like great people doing activism, like in the movie, Chase and Peppermint, just to name a few. These are, really great. And yeah.
I think I'll add to that of like I was that person who was kind of watching in the background for a long while, and I was kind of within or because of news and like all that hostility around trans issues and trans people in general, I was kind of like scared to be that person to step up and talk about it because I was like, well, what are the potential consequences? And it was at some point like last year where I realized it had just gone so bad and I just kept seeing those headlines day after day. And I was like, well, what am I doing here? Just standing. I think it's a very like valid thing to be scared and to not want to be a part of that, just to be clear. But there was a moment for me where I was like, I feel like I'm ready to take on this more like be a voice role, be a leader within this community and try and like make change for myself. And it took me a lot of time to get to that place, but to realize that's like how important it is to have some people. Because if I don't stand up, maybe who else is going to? Like we need whoever would like to. It's great to have people to go out there and be that voice, or else it looks like we aren't represented and we're only represented by what cis people are saying about us. So I want to be a part of that. And that's actually kind of why I joined Youth Voices and started working with It Gets Better to promote like my own trans experience and talk about it.
Bekah, yeah, absolutely. And I think especially within the trans community, so many of the people who are trying to silence the trans community use that concept of fear as a tool to make us silent. Because specifically within our trans community, it's so scary to come out and say, yes, I'm trans, I'm visible, because you're so worried. What if you're going to get hate comments online? What if you're going to feel unsafe at home or at school? And so being a visible trans person, it takes courage, but it's also so important because knowing difference for all of those closeted trans kids out there who are worried whether they'll ever be able to come out.
Yeah, it's about being there and showing them, that we exist, we're here. We're not just something, we're not your toy, we're real people.
Yeah. And for me personally, as a trans activist, and I like to say this, but just living and navigating in a more aggressive environment that's more oppressive to trans people, for me, it kind of came out of a necessity of, not that I want to do this, that I want to be a trans activist, but I need to, because there's so many people around the state. And unfortunately, as big and grandiose as my state is, the laws don't really always reflect the demographics. And, Texas has a lot of trans people, and that's something that I like to say. And really being able to be, on the front pages of newspapers or having my names mentioned in quotes isn't something that I like to do for publicity, but it's to show lawmakers to say that, hey, there's real tangible people behind the policies that you pass, and the policies that are hatred and ultimately oppress and continue to marginalize trans people have genuine effects. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard from other trans kids across the state, and ultimately just people that I'll never get to meet, tell me, like, or comment on social media posts where I may have been featured, saying, oh wow, like it's so cool to see someone who's transgender being open and visible about their story. So I think a lot of it is really just knowing and letting people in power know, like, yeah, we're not stepping down, and no matter how much laws you can put or no matter what you say, we're still going to be here. So I think a lot of that really just comes from knowing that we're here and being visible regardless of all of the things that we're facing.
Yeah, great point, Marshall. And I think actually it's especially important to be visible, not just as trans people, but as trans youth specifically. Because I know some trans people who, they left their family or they grew up, they moved out, and then they came out as trans. But to come out as trans as a youth is another level. And I think it's especially really interesting how all of the arguments against trans people is like, oh, we need to protect the children. We need to protect the children from the transgenders. And yet they're not actually listening to the trans children. So I don't know, as youth activists, what have you guys found as kind of the most important tools or most helpful tools to actually getting adults to listen?
Ooh.
I can start this one off just because I feel like from personal experience from just lobbying, I think a really productive tool that has allowed people to really see and humanize transgender people is just having conversations with people who are like on the anti side, or maybe transphobic. I think having a productive conversation with people who are on this aisle, who are bigoted, is really difficult. But when you genuinely sit down with one of them and start talking to people about your own experience being transgender and being a kid, you'll start to see how much in common you have with people. So I think because we live in a society that ultimately demonizes trans people, and it's no secret, right? Through media, through headlines, having a conversation with what, news or whatever outlet says is scary can be so impactful, just because you're showing them, no, I'm just a kid, I like to eat, I go to school, like being transgender is such a small part of my identity. So I think something that has been like a good tool that has shown to be productive for me personally is just having conversations and ultimately trying to humanize us, because whether transphobes like it or not, we're just kids at the end of the day. We're
Yeah.
kids that happen to be transgender, and a lot of them don't realize how much being transgender is such a small part of our identity. And of course, that's not the same for all transgender people, but for trans kids especially, we're just trying to be used and live our lives.
Yeah, I mean, it's about connecting with them, about sharing your story, about humanizing yourself so they understand that you're a real person, that that their politics have real effect on. But something else I actually have also, seen to work effectively is also showing them like kind of statistics that they can't deny, like
Yeah.
cold hard facts that there's no way of manipulating, getting around, or ignoring them, because a lot of people don't think, you know, oh, it's just a whatever. They make up these excuses, but you have to show these people that no, we are people. We deserve these rights.
Yeah, and
Yeah, I think
actually, if oh, go ahead, Becca.
Oh, sorry. I think a big thing too, and this also goes, I think, for anyone tuning in who's thinking about this less on like a large scale, maybe within your family, within your peer group, within like your smaller community. A big thing as youth, and the fact is, we are dependent, and like as youth, like we are dependent on those around us. We have control, but we also don't, because society has like doesn't empower youth the same way it does adults. So we don't have that same freedom I think adults does, and that makes these laws even more impactful, because it's like you're limiting people who already don't have power. And it's really hard when adults around us see, oh, trans youth shouldn't have this, trans youth shouldn't have that, and they believe it. And it becomes a point where it's like you're trying to fight this really impossible fight, it feels like. But I think a big thing is just honestly, and it's kind of sad that I have to say this, is like instance is showing up and keep making your point. And
Yeah.
I think it goes along with those desires, like how do we humanize it? But when it comes to your own community, it has to be people. It goes with the cold hard facts as well. Like you have to just keep showing people that this is who you are, that this is like this is you, this is what you need, and you need to make people understand that by continuing to do it.
Mhm.
And there's just, unfortunately, I don't think there's a lot of ways around that, simply because the world we live in, and you have to fight this bigger narrative that trans people are bad.
Yeah.
But if you, I found in my experience, if you just keep showing up and you keep spreading your message, that eventually will make some impact. Maybe not to everyone, but to some degree.
Yeah. I also just want to mention how appalling it is that we live in a society where we're having to prove our transness or also just
Yeah.
advocate
Exactly.
that for our humanity. Like we're just kids trying to be kids who happen to have a different identity.
Yeah, like
And it's also,
go
oh,
ahead.
sorry. Oh, it's also that I feel like when you limit our freedom and when you make these laws, like it ends up making our trans identity more important, which is not like that shouldn't be the point. Like I love my trans identity. I celebrate it. I'm an advocate for it. But I feel like it's just really harmful to say like, hey people, like in order to be validated in your trans identity, you have to be more insistent about it, and you have to make it like a bigger deal than necessarily you want to be. And I think that's something like people should have the choice to say, how much do I want to talk about this? How much do I like want to express this and whatnot to people around me? But it's become less and less of a choice the more our freedoms are limited.
Yeah, I mean, like, this spotlight has been put on our identity, whether we want it or not. I feel like being trans is no longer just something you are, it's something you have to prove to be. And, it's just such hypocrisy, I just don't understand it.
Yeah. And I mean, when we're talking about like this whole narrative against trans people versus the cold hard facts, I think part of the reason why we keep having to prove our own identity and why we keep having to have these theoretical debates with people about whether we're really whatever we say that we are inside is just that the cold hard facts really aren't being mentioned here. Like even in the film, for anyone who's watched the film, in the film they were basing court decisions on news articles
Oh,
that
yeah.
ended up actually having
Yeah.
really failed fact checks, and it's because there's so much opinion of spreading of opinions around in media right now about trans people that the facts aren't actually being listened to. Like we can see that doctors all across America are agreeing that gender affirming care is necessary, it's life-saving, but this is not being translated to the laws that are being created.
I think
Absolutely.
that's also interesting too, because I wrote an essay on this case last year, and part of my
Wait, so
essay
did I.
was that's crazy. Part of my essay was listening to the tapes because I wanted to get myself more familiar with what I was writing about. And I was writing mostly about my own narrative, but I brought into the case into as a part of that. And one of the things I noticed when I was listening to the narrative is just like how silly it is. Like I'm listening to this and I'm like, I'm coming into it with a certain perspective, obviously. But even if you came into it with a neutral perspective, I felt like you've got one side who is trying to bring in that like there's humanity. This is what people are saying. These are the facts. And then I was listening to the other side and like respect to everyone, but also no. Like there was just so much like I was like, what are you talking about? Like, where are you getting this? And I just felt like it was so frustrating to see the court who is supposed to go off of the arguments decide what felt like more their beliefs or their opinions than what actually was being presented. And I was like, that's where I feel like it can be frustrating as a trans activist to see like time after time you show up and you show your story, and then oftentimes there'll be other people who simply just won't believe it because they're prejudiced in some way and they believe this
Yeah.
other thing. And
Absolutely.
once again,
Yeah,
it goes
I
back
mean-
to the message: just keep showing up because someone out there will believe it, and that someone can make change, even if it's not everyone. So it can be really frustrating to keep going and doing this kind of work when you're not getting that positive response, but inevitably you will be able to reach someone if you keep trying.
Yeah, I mean, I also, by pure coincidence, I wrote an essay for this for a New York Times contest, whatever. And one of the requirements was to have a source from the New York Times, right? And I was looking through the New York Times is very much a mainstream media, and it's actually addressed in the film a little bit. I was scrolling through the articles, and I could find no good articles. All the articles was like, is being trans really worth it? And I'm like, what is this? The one article that I did chose was written by Chase, like, which is crazy. Chase is literally the main protagonist of Heightened Scrutiny. So, and then later I went to look on for my other sources, these clinical studies. I don't have like the exact studies right now, but and these would show that gender affirming care is good. It's not it's not negative in any way, shape, or form. And it's crazy because these mainstream outlets who are being quoted in court documents, like what makes our laws, aren't even they're not even quoting studies,
Absolutely. And I just wanted to mention how horrible it is that we live in a post-truth world, that it has very grave consequences. And if any medicine saw the success rates that transgender medicine and transgender healthcare has, it would be called a miracle, because it is. And I could talk all day about how like the Supreme Court has been politicized, but I can't get into that here. But ultimately just, how they're not rooted in reality, because transgender healthcare is a real thing and it should be accessible and it is life-saving, and that's just the facts.
And I think fundamentally that kind of stems from this idea that a lot of news outlets have, that they must represent both sides of the argument. So if they represent the side for gender affirming care, they represent the side against gender affirming care. And the issue with this is that when you have an issue like this that is very much medical, it is based in evidence, it is scientific, you should not merely be treating it like a political opinion piece. You should be basing it more heavily on the facts. But because it has become such a politicized topic, people treat it like a political debate rather than like a medical question. And that is why the opinions and the expertise of countless doctors just keep being sidelined in this debate. And I think it's
Yeah.
really unfortunate.
I mean,
And I think that also. Oh, go ahead.
you know what? I'd rather have them like skip the politicians and go straight to the doctors. You know, because then you have a really a nonpartisan, you know, third party, no connections, and they will tell you gender affirming care is good. You know, more people regret having children than having gender affirming care.
I think it's also interesting because the more media takes on that lens of anti-trans healthcare, anti-trans athletes, all the anti-trans issues, the more it perpetuates that that is true. And I think that really rubs off on people who otherwise don't necessarily have a formed opinion. And that's just really harmful to trans youth specifically, because you'll see people around you be more biased against these issues for one way because that's what they've heard. And you can't blame those people. It's they haven't had access to the education to learn the facts the same way we have of this means this and this means that, because that's what's being promoted on their social media feed, on their newspaper. Like that's the narrative that is everywhere. And I think people don't realize just how harmful, like how much control media has over us. So
Yeah.
to have films like Heightened Scrutiny and to have social media channels like It Gets Better that are promoting that more like what else is there to the story? Like what else can we share? That's such an important resource. And unfortunately, it's often accessed by people who have our views, but at the same time, it's just as important. So the more we can get these stories out there and show people who maybe are in a more neutral position right now, hey, here's our side of the story that you might not see otherwise, the better, like the bigger impact it can have.
Yeah, because I mean, let's be real. Like no one who is not trans is going to be reading an entire medical journal article about the benefits of gender affirming care. So if we as advocates or as the queer community or even as allies of the queer community cannot produce that information that shows people the facts, that shows people all of the evidence, people are not going to get that evidence and they're going to continue consuming this negative media.
And I said to my friend the other day, I was like, you know how sad it is that I'm a 16-year-old in high school, right? I got a lot going on. And I had to like pour over my insurance documents to see what our coverage of gender affirming care is. And like, why is that my job as a 16-year-old to have to read these things? Like that's an adult problem. Like this shouldn't be passed on to young people, because like Marshall said, we're just kids. Like we have so many other things going on in our life just like any other kid. And this shouldn't have to dominate our lives and control those other things and make that impact that it does.
And at the same time,
during
go
the
ahead.
during the filming, I was going through my high school application process, you know, which, you know, by no means am I saying that am I in any way ungrateful for being able to participate in the movie. I'm still very grateful for that to this day, and I am so happy that I got this chance to share my story. But, you know, like my only worry should be, you know, oh, have I this essay written for the high school? It shouldn't be, oh, you know, am I gonna have to fight for my rights tomorrow?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean,
and adding on to that, like, sorry for interrupting you, Jay, but like adding on
No
to
worries.
that, it's so sad to see how our like identities have been politicized, like period. Like I should be worried about what I'm gonna eat for dinner, getting my homework done, but instead I open social media seeing something about how trans people are evil or how the Supreme Court just ruled conversion therapy is okay. Like these are such issues that have tangible consequences, and it's horrible to see that it's happening in modern century.
And really, that's kind of the goal of gender affirming care. Like the whole goal of the care is to just like for me, gender affirming care allows me to just be another guy. I don't have to worry about being trans. I don't have to worry about, you know, sports. I don't have to necessarily worry about fitting in. I can just be another guy because of gender affirming care. And without that, it actually makes our trans identity way more prominent. So kind of going back to what Bekah was saying earlier, like if you really don't want us to be constantly talking about how we're trans and being constantly making it a big part of our personality, well, big parts of our personality are formed by adversity. And if I have to explain who I am every time I talk to someone, then yeah, it's going to be a big part of my personality.
I think
But
one
also
thing
kind of go ahead.
I think one thing to keep in mind with that is also like you have the control in a sense. So like I oftentimes feel like an obligation to take on that like educator role as a trans activist who's had the opportunity to have resources like It Gets Better and our training as youth voices and all of these other things where I've learned this information, I know it, and I can teach it to other people. But at the same time, like it's my life. So if today I don't feel like doing that, like that's in my power. If I don't feel like correcting someone about like misgendering me, like that's in my power. Like I don't owe anyone else my trans identity in a sense. Like that's something that I can control. So I think that's something to remember, that when it gets frustrating to be like my trans identity is always front and center all the time, it's like you possess the control of how much you want to make it in that moment. And that could be situational, that could be in general for your life, but that's not something like you're not obligated to be a certain way, to do a certain thing just because you're trans. Like you have that control. And obviously everyone's got their own take on what that looks like for them, but I found it really helpful of like I don't need to do that if I don't feel like it. Like that's my choice.
It shouldn't be your job to educate other people.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Every time I go to the airport, I don't want to give like a sermon about gender identity, like, and how, like, no, just you go deal with it on your own time.
Yeah. And kind of building off of that, actually, as a trans activist, I definitely agree. There are times when I just like, I don't even want to deal with a trans conversation right now. Can I just walk through this airport line, please? And there are other times when I think it's really important. So how do you guys kind of figure out when is the right time to be visible versus when is the right time to be safe? Or when is the right time to take care of yourself and your own mental health?
I guess
I mean, as someone... Oh, go ahead, Mila. Sorry about
No,
that.
you go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. I think as someone who dealt a lot, just like as a face of LGBT policy within my state for so long, like a minor speaking on the issues, I think burnout was something that happened for me and it was really sudden. Because at some point, right, you just want to be a kid, you just want to live your life aside from all of these things of your identity being tied into politics and legislation. And I feel like, just navigating being transgender, which I live in a fairly progressive area, so it's not anything too bad, but just having to ask myself questions like, what do I wear today so I don't get profiled, or which bathroom do I go in? Small minuscule things like that really add up quickly. And I think, um you know being in a state where laws say that I have to go to certain places, or having awkward conversations at TSA, I think that's something that um still happens in other places. But I feel like building a world where transgender people are, safe and accepted can really make those experiences less awkward, and obviously not having barriers that police where people go to pee, or
Yep.
where they go, like, in and exist in public life. So for me, that really just looks like protecting my safety over how I feel sometimes, and sometimes doing that is really uncomfortable. So I'd probably say that's how it is for me personally.
Yeah. I know some people, we live in a variety of different areas. Marshall lives in a slightly more conservative state. Bekah, I know you live in a more liberal state. How is that kind of influenced, like kind of contrasting off of Marshall's experience? Bekah, I was just curious, as your experience living in a more liberal state, how does that affect? Do you still feel unsafe in certain situations? Do you think it's less? How does
Yeah.
being in a supportive community affect you?
I think it's interesting because I live in California, and generally seen as one of the most progressive states, and I live specifically in a very progressive area of California. So you'd think it would be very positive, and for the most part, I think it is. I think, like for example, educators are more educated on trans issues. So I've had more support from like certain teachers and whatnot. I have a lot of peers who, my friends at least, who are a bit more like understanding and whatnot. So I think it just depends. However, at the same time, there's teachers who just like don't know. And that's not their fault. They just haven't received those resources. So I think a lot of times there's a lot less hate, because I think if you hated queer people where we live, you wouldn't last very long for the most part, at least within certain areas that I interact with. There's plenty of people out there who are homophobic where I live, but for the most part, it's generally positive. However, at the same time, it also makes it really interesting when I see people who are much more negative. I remember I've been at a few different high schools, and one of my schools where I was at, like when the election was happening, I heard a bunch of people who were saying very like pro-Trump, anti-trans things about it, and I was just sitting there in the classroom, and some of these people like were very friendly towards me, and I was like, wow, it's just so interesting to be in such a progressive area and to hear such bigoted things from you,
Yeah.
a person I otherwise kind of respect. And it really just, it kind of surprises you more. I think it's good to be in a more progressive environment as a trans person, because you're going to have that general, I'd say, like public support of a majority will side with you, and there's enough people there who are educated who will stand up for you. And I think that's really important. But at the same time, transphobia is still out there, and especially microaggressions. I have seen so many microaggressions since I came out, like more than anything. I think there's a lot less like outwardly bigoted things, and I haven't heard as much of that in person, more so online. But in terms of microaggressions, I know so many people who misunderstand the trans experience, have like misunderstood something they saw in the news or whatnot. Like they just don't know the facts. So I think that makes education more important than ever at this time.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who also lives in a pretty blue area, it's really done me wonders. It's helped me had access to a bunch of resources that I think I would have otherwise have not had access to. But there's still kind of like this unspoken truth of like, oh, you have to be careful who you say it to, even though most likely, they're gonna be, they're gonna be chill with it. They're not gonna care, but I still find myself being like, oh, should I wear this pin? And I think that's kind of like, I guess, a deeper issue in our society as a whole, because there's just a lot of internalized feelings that I think, are being driven by this kind of, media representation, which is painting us so negatively. And I think, but in general, like I've only been here because of the resources I've gotten, and I've only gotten those resources because I live in such a like liberal area.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a 14-year-old girl should never have to fear for her own safety just wearing a trans pin and walking around in the streets of her hometown. Yeah, go ahead. Actually,
I think
we
it's
have
also
only a few.
interesting.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, this is glitching a little bit, but I think it's also really interesting that like they put a lot of care. Like it's a more progressive area, but then you'll have the issue of there's super huge waiting lists. There's not enough centers, and now with all the cuts being made, where people are like scared, like healthcare providers are backing down, and it's making it even more pressing when it's like, well, now there's just as many people trying to access this care, and even less doctors who feel comfortable like bringing it to you because of the national attitude. So I think that's like, even in a progressive area, there's still so many flaws. It's obviously not the same issues all the time, but we just have a general, nationally and honestly globally, there's just a generally negative attitude towards the trans community, which is just creating more and more problems for us. And it's only going to keep harming us and promoting those negative narratives.
Yeah, I mean, actually, personally, recently, my trans, like my gender affirming healthcare provider actually stopped providing gender affirming healthcare. So I've been trying to find a new one, and it's really been just kind of a wake up call to be like, even the deepest blue fortress isn't impenetrable. So it just shows that we have to be strong in this time.
Absolutely. And I feel like that really just says like people or politicians who claim to support us should stop succumbing to people who don't support us, or stand with us even when times or political climates seem uncertain. Gender affirming healthcare is healthcare. And it's so sad that we as kids have to focus on, okay, where am I going to get my next medication that keeps me going, that keeps me alive, that affirms who I am
Yeah.
inside.
Yeah.
And kind
I
of
think
building
that's
off of that, actually, if I could just ask all of you, as a very last question, our final question, what is one message that you guys would like to send to every trans kid or every person who is watching this broadcast right now?
I could start if you guys want. I think one thing I'd say is find people who don't make your trans identity your focal point. I have multiple groups of friends who are very good about just like accepting me as I am and not making a thing. And occasionally maybe they'll ask questions or bring it up, but it's for the most part like that's not a part of who I am. I'm like their castmate. I'm their friend. I'm their coworker. Like it doesn't matter. And I think that's really good to have, especially in a time when your trans identity is such a like broadcasted part of you, to find people who can look past that and see you just as the person you are, and for the allies out there to be that person to someone. And I don't think it's wrong necessarily to have genuine curiosity and like ask appropriate questions to make trans people know, but make sure that you support them in a way that's showing like I see you as the person you are and not just this identity. And if it comes to it and your identity is being like threatened in some way, like I am willing to be there to stand up for you, and I'm educating myself so I can be that ally and the best ally I can be to go and stand by you and support you. But for the most part, you are just my friend. You are just the person who I like.
Yeah, I mean, it's really about loving yourself in this era of so much hate against the community, so much, so many things are being said about us which are not true. So many people have adapted this harmful and hurtful viewpoint on trans kids and trans minors especially. So just love yourself before anything. It's, quoting RuPaul, if you can't love yourself, how the hell are you going to love anybody else? It's all about, that self-love, that self-acceptance, which then we can push outwardly to accept others and love them.
Absolutely. Both Bekah and Mila, you both said amazing things. And for me personally, I think something I would tell to trans or just queer youth in general is that um it may seem like society or the world is stacked against you, but wherever it is that you are, you need to persevere just to create a life for yourself where you can live authentically and be yourself, and ultimately just garner and help build a society that becomes more accepting of us. And I know that it's really difficult to try to cling on to hope right now, especially as the political climate is just so um just ultimately oppressive to us. But it really does get better, and I want everyone to know that no matter where you are, no matter what you identify as.
Sorry, I want to jump in here before we come off. One thing I was thinking about today is we're part of It Gets Better, but what not only does it get better, or it does get better, but also like why isn't it better now is the question I oftentimes find myself asking. So today's Trans Day of Visibility, I encourage everyone who's listening here to kind of think about what they can do to make things better now for trans youth and trans people in general.
Yeah. To everyone watching, donate to mutual aid, support trans nonprofits, support It Gets Better, and support politicians and nonprofits, and put your money to
Yeah.
organizations that make sure that we have better livelihood. Vote for people who vow to protect us. Yeah, Mila?
And also, a quick reminder, Heightened Scrutiny is streaming for free. And so it's in the chat if you want to watch. And you should watch it. It's a really good movie. It was at Sundance Film Festival, 10 out of 10. Really do recommend it.
All right. Well, that is a wrap for today's discussion. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and we'll see you later.
Bye.